Well, if it was up to me, Howie Roseman could do whatever he wants the rest of the offseason, and it wouldn't matter because he made the move that he had to make yesterday. We'll get into it coming up on this Thursday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Welcome in, Eagles fans, to this Thursday edition of the show. It's brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. He did it. Unbelievable that 365 days have gone by since I had the mindset Howie Roseman would never, ever pay a running back a multi-year contract. He would never pay a linebacker a multi-year contract that puts him in the top 5 highest paid players of that position, let alone both of them. Just 1 year later, in back-to-back days, Howie Roseman gave out the highest paid contract to a running back in NFL history, and then turned around the next day and paid Zack Baun the 4th most money of any inside linebacker in the NFL. But I'm so happy he did. I'm so happy that he continues to learn from his past mistakes, like letting TJ Edwards and Kazir White walk in 2023, seeing the disaster that was linebacker that year. I love that he continues to change his philosophies and is so open-minded, because this was the move that he had to make, was signing Zack Baun. Look, I want Mekhi Becton back. I would love to have Milton Williams in Midnight Green in 2025. Same with Josh Sweat. But I can understand letting all of them go, and I think the Eagles will be fine if they let all of those free agents go. Zack Baun, as you guys know, I've said this on the show multiple times throughout the last month, he was the necessity move that you had to make. You needed to make sure that he was re-signed. And I'm so glad they got ahead of this before he hit the open market, because I'm not sure what he would have commanded on the open market. I mean, just look at the contract he got before he hit the UFA pool. A 3-year extension worth $51 million total, $34 million in guaranteed money. He's making about $17 million a year annually. That puts him as the 4th highest paid linebacker in the NFL. So if he had other teams vying for his services as well, that could have put him in the 18 to 20 a year range. Probably not. This is probably the contract that he would have gotten. And so good on Howie Roseman not to try to lowball him. But again, things get competitive in unrestricted free agency, and I'm glad that Howie Roseman was not bullish and stuck in his ways of this position like he has been in the past. And like I said with running back the other day, I don't think investing first-round picks consistently, top-tier money at linebacker all the time is the right philosophy. But I do think, and me and Gino, and he used to be on the podcast, we used to say this offseason after offseason, we don't need multiple star linebackers that you invest a lot in, but you need to have one every down green dot player that you do invest that one significant resource in, whether it is a first or second round pick, whether it is one nice contract. And this is it. Zack Baun is the player. Now, of course, you have to when Nakobe Dean comes back, but even if they decide in the future not to pay Nakobe Dean, I'm okay with that. But you can't have nothing at linebacker. And you cannot let, even though Howie has made it work and he's found a undrafted free agent like TJ Edwards to play extremely well, and he signed Nigel Bradham to a team-friendly deal, and he was a stud for that 2017 Super Bowl team. And even though Zack Baun was a guy that signed a 1-year league minimum deal last year to play a completely different position, even though Howie has made it work at linebacker, going year by year, sometimes just picking up scraps and turning them into gold, that isn't always a sustainable strategy. There's been years where that doesn't work out. Like the year they brought in Eric Wilson. I mean, that was a disaster. Corey Nelson, Zach Cunningham, Shaq Leonard. It doesn't always work to go bargain bin hunting at linebacker. It does sometimes, but when you find that player, especially one that becomes a first-team All-Pro like Zack Baun did, you don't let that guy out of the building. You don't let a linebacker that was number 1 in the NFL last year in overall coverage grade and overall grade in general, according to PFF, you don't let that guy walk out the door. He allowed the fewest yards per coverage snap of any linebacker in football, according to Next Gen Stats. He was literally the best linebacker in the NFL last year. And bringing him in, Vic Fangio having the vision to move him from the edge rusher position, that jack spot, to the inside, was one of the biggest reasons that you won a Super Bowl this year. And so again, I don't think suddenly the Eagles should be a team that heavily invests in linebacker year after year after year, but you got to have that one guy, and Zack Baun is that player. And you especially needed him back because, as I've said on this show, I don't believe Nakobe Dean's going to be back for a while in 2025. I'm not willing to do what the Eagles did in 2023, where they said, and I know they had Nakobe Dean and there was a lot of excitement around Nakobe, so I understand the logic a little bit of letting Edwards or White walk. But it was bold to let both starters at this position from a Super Bowl team walk out the door, and they paid for it dearly. That team was old and slow at linebacker, not just linebacker, but corner and safety. Not anymore. You can see the difference. When the Eagles do make it to championships and win championships, they normally have one stud linebacker. Nigel Bradham, TJ Edwards, Zack Baun. I mean, Zack Baun does everything you want. He forces turnovers, interceptions, forced fumbles. He is incredible at tackling against the run. He's, again, a pass rusher in the past. So, 3-4 sacks in 2024? He's a good pass rusher that you can blitz and send off the edge through the A-gap. He's versatile. He's a great leader. I mean, this is not a player that you let walk out the door. And I don't think he was a one-year fluke. I think Vic Fangio saw Baun's best traits and moved him to the position that best maximizes his potential. And I think Baun can only get better in this defense. And he's still smack dab in the middle of his prime at 27 years old. So this was a move I think the Eagles had to make. $17 million a year puts him as the fourth highest paid linebacker in the NFL. I love it. And I love that, again, Howie Roseman is always willing to be open-minded. And even though in the past he hasn't done this a lot or ever, I like that he says, no, this time it makes sense. This is the right time and the right player, just like it was bringing in Saquon Barkley. I don't think this is going to be something that you can get used to, but this is a unique situation where you have a first-team All-Pro that you just struck gold. You found a diamond in the rough, and you don't let that guy leave now that you found him. And that's the awesome part about this story is, Howie Roseman and the Eagles, a big reason for their turnaround since 2020 is how improved Howie has been at drafting early in the first, second round. He's just had some whiffs in the past early on in drafts. And to put this team behind, they had to rely on a lot of older veterans, free agent, Band-Aid signings. Bringing in all the Georgia guys and the Bama guys, that's improved this team tremendously and has helped them become a consistent championship contender. But one thing Howie has always been good at throughout his entire time in Philadelphia, when you talk about Zack Baun, TJ Edwards, Jordan Mailata, Jason Peters, the list goes on and on, Reed Blankenship, he is so good at finding diamonds in the rough. And now that you've gotten great at drafts early on, when you have that combination, it is so crucial. It has been such a strength of this football team. And it's not just Howie that's done this, but, you got to give credit to Vic Fangio. He's the one that had this vision for Zack Baun. Howie signed him probably to be a rotating edge rusher along with Brandon Graham, Bryce Huff, and Josh Sweat. But Fangio saw a different vision, and it worked. Jeff Stoutland, that kind of guy, deserves so much credit for seeing the vision with Jordan Mailata. And Mekhi Becton, Nick Sirianni deserves a lot of credit for that too. It's not just Howie, but this team as a collective is so Zack Baun is just another success story of what the biggest, strongest trait the Eagles have had over the last decade and a half is finding guys late in the draft, undrafted free agents, low-key free agent signings, and turning it into gold, turning water into wine. That is something they're so good at. Howie finds these players and the talent they have at a bargain rate, and then the coaches turn them into studs. So you got to give a tip of the cap to Howie Roseman, Jeff Stoutland, Vic Fangio. A lot of the Eagles core, yes, a lot of it now is first, second round picks, top-tier alphas. But a lot of this core is made up of undrafted, free agents, late-round draft picks, lower-tier free agent signings. And it's another reason the Eagles are such a special organization in the NFL. And I'm glad they were proactive and not reactive for once at the linebacker position. This was the necessity of this offseason. You had to bring back Zack Baun, The rest is chalk. The rest is just icing on the cake for me. I'm satisfied already. I really am. They had to get this done, and I'm so glad Zack Baun will be back in 2025. All right, guys, coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, we're going to wrap up our offseason options series with a few days away until unrestricted free agency begins. We're going to flip sides of the field and go to the offense. What skill position players could Howie Roseman be interested in? Offensive linemen, all that and more coming your way right here on Locked On Eagles. This episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature. It keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether you're backing your team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, I never feel like I miss my chance. I've been winning some big money on the red-hot Los Angeles Lakers. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, so Howie Roseman has been busy at work the last few days, re-signing Zack Baun, extending Saquon Barkley's contract, letting Darius Slay go, letting James Bradbury go. A lot of this work that's being done is on the defensive side of the ball because that's where a lot of your short-term decisions are. A lot of your free agents are on defense. You've got coming up Milton Williams, the decision there, Josh Sweat, even looking at Oren Burks. Do you want to re-sign him now and pair him with Zack Baun while Nakobe Dean is recovering from that leg injury? Isaiah Rodgers, I'm not sure if I just mentioned him, but if not, maybe bring him back to compete with Keely Ringo if you don't bring back Darius Slay. Most of the big decisions this offseason, yet again, have to do with the defense. But if Howie does make any sort of moves on offense next week, what would he do? I think the one position you can focus on the most, at least from a skill position standpoint, is tight end. I think tight end is the one position that you could see something significant happen soon. And I don't even want to just say free agency, but maybe there's even a trade for a player from another team. You could do like a Bryce Huff for a Michael Mayer swap, the Las Vegas Raiders second-round pick from a few years ago that now is kind of just a rotational piece because they have a stud ahead of him in Brock Bowers. Maybe you trade for a Michael Mayer and say, if we don't believe in Bryce Huff next year, Vic Fangio just doesn't trust him, even though I think he can still be a good rotational edge rusher in obvious passing situations. Let's say a team like the Raiders wants to replace Malcolm Kuntz. If he leaves with Bryce Huff, swap a young player for a young player that fell out of favor and they need a change of scenery, maybe Michael Mayer can be your tight end too. Or maybe you bring in, a free agent like Zach Ertz. Maybe a reunion does make sense with Zach. I talked about it in my offseason simulation. I actually would welcome this. And I don't know if Ertz would want to be back because he would be the backup to his former backup in Dallas Goedert. And Ertz did kind of have a rejuvenated 2024 season where he had almost 70 receptions, almost 700 receiving yards, 7 touchdowns through the air, had a really good playoff run with the Commanders. I think he'll probably want to go somewhere else, maybe probably back to Washington where he'll be used more. He'll be a starter with an offense. But we know how much Zach Ertz loved Philadelphia. We could see it in his face walking off the field of the Link after the NFC Championship game when he was embraced by Fletcher Cox heading to the visitor locker room. We know how much he loved being an Eagle. Maybe, just maybe, he does want to end his story in Philadelphia again and say, I'm going to go for that second Super Bowl ring with the Eagles. Like, what a story that would be to come back. You know Howie Roseman loves a good reunion if it makes sense. I think from the Eagles standpoint, it would make a lot of sense to bring back Zach Ertz. Then you have a pass-friendly 12 personnel package. I like the steps I saw from Grant Calcaterra last year, but I don't think it was enough to not upgrade this position. So if Zach Ertz would want to come back, I think on the Eagles side it would make sense. For Ertz, I don't know if it would, but if he's prioritizing legacy, if he's prioritizing being where he wants to truly be and winning a championship over individual accolades, then maybe it does make sense. That's something that I would love to see, and I think you would all love to see number 86 back in midnight green as well. So that's something that makes sense. I think no matter what they do of significance in the skill position group, it's probably at tight end. I think the most significant thing you should do that I haven't even mentioned yet is extend Dallas Goedert's contract. Like, he has no guaranteed money left on this deal. I don't think he wants this contract to stay the way it is in 2025. I don't think the Eagles do either. There's got to be some resolution with this, whether you trade him, whether you extend him to a short or long-term deal. I know he gets injured a lot, but Dallas Goedert is so elite. He showed you that in the playoff run, that I'm willing to deal with him missing 3 to 5 games a year because of how good he is when he's playing for those other 13 games and the playoff run. He's one of the best playoff tight ends in NFL history already. I mean, his numbers are up there with the best of the best. And so if it was up to me, I'm extending Dallas Goedert. He's only 30 years old. I know everybody's trying to replace him because this was the age Zach Ertz was when they drafted Goedert. But Goedert has a lot of football left in him, and clearly so did Zach Ertz. He's been playing at a high level still for 7 years since they drafted Goedert. I don't think that move at the time was to replace Ertz. It ended up working out that way because Goedert became elite, and you couldn't pay both top-tier money. But when they did draft him at the time, it was a luxury pick from a Super Bowl team that felt like they didn't have any holes, and they just wanted to add more weapons for Carson Wentz and eventually Nick Foles. So I think Goedert can still play for a very long time. If they sign him to a 3-4 year extension, I'm totally cool with that. Like, I think a 3-year deal, kind of like they just gave Zack Baun, who's about to be 28 years old, I think that would make a lot of sense for Goedert. And then you bring in a good backup plan, whether you draft somebody early like an Elijah Arroyo from Miami, a Harold Fannin from Bowling Green, maybe it's a Mason Taylor from LSU, a Gunnar Helm from Texas. Maybe it's one of those guys. Maybe you do bring back a Zach Ertz, or you trade for a Michael Mayer, or even Mike Gesicki is on the open market. That's a guy that had over 60 receptions last year and over 600 receiving yards for the Bengals. Maybe he's a guy that makes some sense. There's guys out there, Jawan Jennings. I think that's the best case scenario for me. That's the best plan. Extend Goedert, make the money work for both sides. I don't know if he wants to reset the market at tight end. I don't know if he can expect that, even with that playoff run, considering his injury history. If him and the Eagles can come to some middle ground and still have him be a top 5 paid tight end, I think you do that. I do not want to trade him, although they might consider it. I would not. And then you invest a pretty good resource in competition for Grant Calcaterra. I would like that to be through the draft or a reunion with Zach Ertz, but who knows what that could be. Again, it could be a trade. Maybe you go for I don't love this player, but a Dawson Knox from the Buffalo Bills. There's some options out there. Maybe there's guys that we haven't even thought of. Would Kyle Pitts be available with Atlanta? I don't know. I doubt it, but I think there's some guys out there. Tight end is the one position to look at the most because I don't know what else they would really do when it comes to the skill positions. Wide receiver, I think they're set. You have Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown. I like Jahan Dotson a lot as wide receiver 3 heading into year 2, especially coming off that impressive playoff run. Year 2 with Jalen Hurts, that playoff run clearly grew a lot more trust within Hurts and Dotson, that dynamic. I think they're going to throw the football more this year. I think Dotson's going to be a much bigger part of the Eagles offense in year 2. But you could add some depth behind him. They are pretty thin at receiver. Behind Dotson, Smith, and Brown, all you have is Johnny Wilson and Britton Covey. Covey can't stay healthy. Johnny Wilson's hands last year were very concerning. I wouldn't mind the idea of bringing in another veteran to compete with Dotson or rotate in, like a Robert Woods would make sense. The Eagles were interested in Woods in the past. Maybe you want a gadget guy like a Rondale Moore is on the open market. Heck, I'm going to keep going back to the reunion well. Nelson Aguilar is out there as a UFA. He's been a pretty solid wide receiver 4 in Baltimore over the last couple years. I would welcome a little Nelly reunion. I don't know if Eagles fans would, but Super Bowl hero, I'd bring him back. I don't know if there's a significant move at receiver. Again, on offense, they're so locked up with top-tier contracts and very little holes that I think it's just about, taking care of the depth. Even running back, I think if you're not re-signing Kenneth Gainwell, you're likely drafting a running back to complement Saquon Barkley and Will Shipley. So I think the big move, if you're going to expect anything next week or just in the next 2 months on offense with skill positions, it's going to be at tight end. The one big move we have to get into coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles that has to do with the offense is the right guard position. What the heck is going to happen with Mekhi Becton? We'll get into that coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles. All right, so I feel like I've had a pretty good understanding of this Eagles offseason. Like, I knew they were probably going to release Darius Slay. Zack Baun was going to be the priority. I think Josh Sweat and Milton Williams, as much as Howie would love them back, he knows their market's just going to be too oversaturated, too competitive. They're going to get a bag. Milton Williams, especially after seeing that deal with the Cowboys and their defensive tackle, that name's going to be tough for me to remember off the top. It's a long one. He got $20+ million a year. Milton's going to get $20+ a year. Sweat, even though there's a lot of edge rushers in the open market, and another one was added yesterday, Joey Bosa, released from the Chargers. That's just another name the Eagles have as a potential replacement option. I don't know what Sweat's market's going to be, but he'll likely get $20+ a year as well. A 27-year-old coming off a career year, an incredible Super Bowl performance that could have won him the MVP. I think they're going to probably price themselves out of Philadelphia. So the only kind of situation I can't figure out is Mekhi Becton. That's the one I have no idea what the market's going to look like. Because it would make sense if he had a huge contract waiting for him from another team. Mekhi Becton's a young player heading into his second contract, a former top 10 pick, has all the traits in the world, generational size and power, coming off a career year, where a rejuvenated season where he finally met that potential of a top 10 pick, but it was at the guard position. Like, does another team see him as a tackle? Do they see him as a guard? I could see him getting a huge deal, but I could also see, because of that unknown at what position you want him, that unknown if he's going to be able to replicate this outside of Stoutland University, because there are some other really good interior offensive line options in the open market, and I do think it's a good draft for that as well. The 2025 NFL draft is what I keep calling it, a meat and potatoes type of draft. Because of that, I don't know what Mekhi Becton's market's going to be. I don't want to sit on the fence and not have a take, but if you told me he signed a very team-friendly deal to come back to Philadelphia because that's what the market was, or he even realized the grass is always greener and that Jets trauma kind of pushes him back to his comfort of Philadelphia, I could totally see that. But if you also said the Eagles just can't afford his price, considering what the open market's demanding, and the fact that they're investing 3 contracts in this offensive line already in top 10 value, and will probably have another one within the next week or two, re-signing Cam Jurgens to an extension, I don't know if they can afford all 5 offensive linemen getting paid like a top 10 player at their position. So if you told me that he walks, and they also recognize how replaceable that spot is with Jeff Stoutland turning everyone into a stud, that would make sense too. I would understand both sides. I could totally see both scenarios playing out, and I wouldn't be shocked. Right now, gun to my head, I would lean that he's gone and that he will have a bigger market out there than the Eagles see worth paying him. But if he's back, I wouldn't be shocked. I really don't know. Again, I feel like I have a really good understanding of Sweat's situation and Williams' situation. I knew Baun was going to be the priority, or at least I hoped. I figured Darius Slay was going to get let go on the current contract that he was at. I think they'll bring back Isaiah Rodgers and Oren Burks. Becton's the one dude that I'm just like, whatever happens, happens, and we'll leave it up to the football gods because I really can't see the future on that one. One thing I can totally see happening on the offensive line coming up is I think you're going to see extensions for Cam Jurgens and Lane Johnson. I think Cam Jurgens right now is set to make, I think, under $2 million in 2025, and he had a really good season at center, replacing an all-time legend in Jason Kelce, showing that incredible toughness in the NFC Championship and the Super Bowl with that back injury. They're going to want to extend Cam Jurgens. This is what Howie does when he recognizes you're a long-term core piece. He's going to get the deal done earlier than later. Again, proactive versus reactive. And then Lane Johnson says he still wants to play for potentially years to come, and it doesn't look like he's slowing down anytime soon. So I think they'll be okay with backloading a new extension for him too and freeing up some immediate cash. So I have no idea what's going to happen with Becton, but I can tell you the next 2 shoes to drop with in-house extensions, again, Rodgers and Burks are the lower key ones. But I think the next two big deals you'll see, an extension for Cam Jurgens and maybe a smaller extension for Lane Johnson when it comes to term. So that's what I'm predicting is coming up next. And then when it comes to unrestricted free agency, who knows? I think edge rusher and defensive tackle are the two big positions to watch based on trying to replace Josh Sweat and or Milton Williams. But it's going to be fun to follow along next week. The chaos, it's going to continue. It's already been a busy week with the Saquon deal, with the Baun extension, with releasing Slay and Bradbury. This is Howie season, right? The offseason, we've been catapulted right into it after a Super Bowl win. And it's going to be a busy time next week as unrestricted free agency officially opens up at the beginning of the week with legal tampering starting on the 9th. All right, guys, it's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Eagles. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day. Make sure your second listen is the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast with Damian Parsons and Keith Sanchez, getting you ready for the 2025 NFL Draft Monday through Friday. Thanks so much for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds. Fly, Eagles, fly.